Hi, everyone. That's how it's going to work, at least. So, the first person to talk about is Ilya Ehrenberg. So, we've spoken so far about the, let's say, Nabokov family, Vladimir Nabokov Sr., who was the father to the Vladimir Nabokov, the writer. He was well, a cadet, a constitutional Democrat, a big opposition to the Bolsheviks. There were a lot of people, just writers, just artists who had nothing to do with politics at all and didn't want to have anything to do with it. There were people who were the white army members, who were the officers, soldiers, who were the biggest threat for the Red Army. And the it's not exactly correct to say that all the Russian immigrants were the white émigré, because originally it only applied to the white army officers, soldiers, and all the army people. But this is kind of a generalization, and it's also used everywhere in historiography, world historiography. So I guess that's the term we'll carry on with. But there are buts. And speaking of Ilya Ehrenberg, that's a different kind of a character. Yeah, I have spoken about him before, and I actually, the more I speak about him, the more I'm inclined to give a tour about him only. He is a very interesting character. He was a revolutionary, a Jew. But this tour is not about just Russians. It's about Georgians. It's about the Jews, it's about Ukrainians, it's about the people from Belarus and many, many other nations. Sometimes I don't even mention the background because it's when I say Russians, I mean just the citizens of the subjects of the former Russian Empire. That's basically it. But when it's important, I of course mention the background, the nationality, religion, if it matters. With Leavenberg, it matters because he was the representative of the so-called pro-revolutionary anti-Tsarist movement. And that movement was not religious at all. So he was not a religious Jew, but he was a very educated Jew whose family for many generations had been oppressed, obviously. And he was one of those many, many Jewish boys who had grown knowing that that regime could not carry on. For his participation in revolutionary activities, uh, not exactly terrorism. He wasn't involved in terrorism, but he was involved in multiple operations to undermine certain things. And he also distributed anti-Tsarist prohibited literature and things like that. So eventually, he had to leave the country in 1900s, and he stayed for a long time in Europe. He had a good education. He made friends while staying in Europe, in Paris. He was friends with artists of the Montmartre. He was friends with writers, politicians, and he was a ladies' man. Well, I mean, just see the photos, obviously. And he was a writer, a very talented one, a very good writer indeed. And he considered himself, when the revolution happened, he went back to Russia because he welcomed the revolution. It's something he had been fighting for, and he never stopped fighting for it. But after he was exiled, he would have to be doing this from the outside of the country. And when he came, his, he was quite quickly given a job. At that time, well, by the way, that's a mugshot. That's because he had been caught red-handed by the Tsarist police. So he faced many years in prison. So eventually, so he was exiled, and then he left after he stayed in exile for some time. He left the country. Then he would come back after the revolution. And it's just, I'm not going into details here because it's not the point of the tour, but I spoke on my previous tour. I have just given one of the last, maybe for now it's going to be the last, it was the last episode on the history of the Jewish diaspora in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. And I'll just, for those who haven't seen those stories, I'll just quickly explain that the revolution, there were many people that participated in revolution activity and contributed to the revolution of 1917. And there were many Jews who contributed to that. And there were many Jews that welcomed the revolution because they had been hoping for a better life without restrictions, without having to be living in the pale settlements and things like that. So it was not a problem for a Jew who supported the Bolshevik regime to find a job, to be given work, to be promoted, to be respected, and to do what, well, let's say what they did best, unless it was something that didn't exactly go along with the strategy of the Bolsheviks. So that's the idea. And Edinburgh was a good writer, and he complied. So he considered himself a Bolshevik. So yes, he was definitely not the white immigration movement. However, however, he stood out. The Bolsheviks knew how friendly he was with many great minds in Europe. They used him as a sort of a representative, as a diplomat, as a tool to show that it wasn't really that bad in the Soviet Union. And also the Soviet Union, you see, this is the photo of Edinburgh and Pablo Picasso. They were very good friends. They remained friends throughout the Soviet period. And they exchanged letters. They saw each other every once in a while. Edinburgh was allowed to leave the country, go to Europe for business trips, and then to come back. He did it multiple times. So the Soviet Union struggled to get recognition from the international community. And for a long time, Europe did not want to recognize the new state. Little by little, well, Germany was among the first countries to recognize the Soviet Union. So Berlin would be one of the first destinations for the Soviet government to, well, to send diplomats to go on different meetings, delegations, and whatnot. And it was important for the Soviet Union to show to Europeans that things were not really that bad. Plus, as you know, in 1920s, shortly after the establishment of the Soviet state, there was so-called the new economic policy that was running for, well, let's say, up until the end of the 1920s, when some private property and some small businesses would be encouraged and supported by the state. And yeah, there was the freedom, there was some international tourism. That was the strategy that Lenin opted for, and that it lasted for some time. So it was important to show that things were not really that bad. And Ehrenburg was a powerful tool for that. Was he a spy? There's no really record of him being a spy. He was the representative of the Soviet Union, and he just was there to show that there were a lot of educated people in the country, there was culture, and also he did a lot for the country. Uh, I mean, a lot of positive things, especially for the culture, for the education, for the preservation of the heritage, because exactly thanks to the friendship between Picasso and Ehrenberg, um, after the war in early 1950s, Stalin the allowed to exhibit again to get from the basement of Moscow Museum to show the collection of Impressionist and post-Impressionist works from the private nationalized collections of Chupin and Morozov. It was exactly because of this friendship from Ehrenberg and Picasso. I gave you the story. I'm not going into detail. And after that, as you know, Mona Lisa once left Louvre and came to Moscow. So that was also thanks to Ehrenberg, first of all to Ehrenberg, and then diplomacy. And that's how little by little, you know, and when Khrushchev, after Stalin passed away, Khrushchev came to power. The times of Khrushchev is the time when the cult of Stalin was cancelled, and a lot of mistakes of Stalin regime were recognized by Khrushchev. That's when Edinburgh was there, and he wrote a very, I would say, quite anti-Soviet, anti-Stalin poem, not poem, a novel called Thaw. And that novel gave name to the entire to the entire period. It was called Thaw. So Ehrenberg, who had lived in Berlin for a while, he would be coming back and forth. He would be talking to writers, artists, lots of Russian immigrants, and it wasn't his main goal to make people come back. But yes, indeed, there were. Uh, he talked to some representative of Russian immigration, such as Ivan Bunin and some others, to, well, at least go and see. That was one strategy that the Soviet Union had. Again, we don't know whether he really spied for the Soviet Union. It didn't look like that. He was more of a diplomat. In a way, he wasn't exactly a politician. He tried to stay away from politics. That's, by the way, the portrait of his portrait by Picasso, and it would be hanging in his office up until the death um, of Ehrenberg. That's the portrait. That's his photo in his study. Um, but that was just one strategy. Even, let's say, after the let's put it like that, when Lenin passed away and then Stalin came to power, Stalin had a lot of trust issues, and one of the first things he did would be eliminating everyone who was there with Lenin, because we know that Lenin wouldn't have assigned Stalin to be the next in charge of the country. Lenin never really liked Stalin, but he seized the power and everything. And apart from that, Stalin saw a great threat, and in general, the party saw a great threat in the Russian immigration movement. And partially there was a reason for it, because there would, throughout this period up until 1930s, there would be a lot of political parties. We spoke of so many newspapers, social democratic, um, monarchies, and many, many, many other publishing houses, different newspapers, different political circles that people would be members of. It was very diverse, I would say, in general community. And there were also white army officers that still were hoping at some point to go back and fight the Bolsheviks. So once the German government recognized the Soviet Union, it would be a lot easier for them, for the Bolsheviks, to penetrate the country and infiltrate different circles, all those political circles. And the most infamous stories would be coming from the so-called Operation Threat from OGPU. Basically, OGPU, it was this internal and external security service. You can say KGB. OGPU is sort of a part of the KGB, or better say, even the predecessor of the KGB. So, what was that? That's the most ingenious things. That's the most smartest things ever. The Bolsheviks came up with an idea to um, create a secret underground community. anti-Bolshevik. And their goal was to, to, let's say, onboard Russian immigrants and make special operations. Have those Russians give them illegal documents, fake documents, fake identities, come to Russia and fight the Bolsheviks, assassinate Bolsheviks, spy on the Bolsheviks, go back to the country and report. So the KGB was all the mastermind of this whole dress operation. That was the idea. So the KGB basically created anti-Soviet, anti-Bolshevik community, the secret underground community, which was all a whole, all of it. Um, they had kind of two missions. The first one was to find anti-Bolsheviks, drag them into the country, and punish them, like punish them big time. And there are several stories that some of them I have shared, some of them I have never shared. So one of them is the story of Boris Seven, who was a very big anti-monarchist, and he himself participated in several plots to kill monarchists, to kill members of the Duma. He was involved in several uh, assassinations. So he was the terrorist. So originally, he was kind of on the same side with the Bolsheviks. But when the revolution happened, when there were two revolutions, right? There was a revolution in February. There was a bourgeois revolution, the result of which Nicholas abdicated. Nicholas II abdicated, and that was the time when a so-called provisional government ruled the country. It was temporary, and the idea that in 1918 there would be a constituent assembly established, and so from then on it would be a new political party ruling the country. That's the mugshot because obviously Ivankov had been arrested several times, and yes, he also had to escape from the country. Then he would return when the Bolshevik Revolution, when the February Revolution happened, and he was there. He worked with the provisional government. He worked with Kerensky. That, for example, that Kerensky and that Stefankov sitting in the Winter Palace in the library, in the former library of Nicholas II. So he was there. Uh, he he was going to be there, rebuilding, reshaping the future of the country. And when the Bolsheviks invaded, when the Bolsheviks took over in October 1970, they took over the provisional government. Uh, he was not accepted, and he did not want to to carry on with the policy of the Red Terror. So he had to flee, just like Kerensky had to flee and many others. Kerensky was lucky; he died his own death in Europe. Well, that's a different story, and I might give a talk about Kerensky at some point, but not now. So Savinkov escaped, and he stayed in Berlin, and he continued his work. He continued participating in different gatherings, anti-Bolshevik circles, and eventually he became involved with the trust operation again. So the legend was that this trust operation had people on the other side of the border. They had people in Russia that would let him in under his, fake document, and he had different missions. So So he was supposed to assassinate one of the Bolsheviks in the gatherings in Moscow. Originally, he was arrested and there was a trial. He was he was interrogated. Uh, he was beaten. He was tortured. Eventually, he acknowledged everything. He confessed to everything. And for that, he was supposed to be given, he wasn't supposed to be uh, executed. He was supposed to be given a term in prison, quite a long one. And then he committed suicide. Or it was designed to look like a suicide. That's the photo of the trial. There was obviously it wasn't a very, I would say, fair trial. It was it was far from there. There wasn't even a lawyer, and he had to speak for himself. He had to testify for himself, and he had to defend himself. Well, he confessed to everything, and uh, uh, and he died. He committed suicide. He fell from the window. But again, that's some people claim that he was helped to fall from the window. So another person that had been killed. I'm just going with a big fat fact. Sidney Riley, who whose name may ring a bell to you, because Sidney Riley is known as one of the greatest spies of the 20th century, a prototype for James Bond, ace of the spies. And Sidney Riley originally was a Jewish boy from Odessa, Zygmunt Rosenblum. It took 20 years to the British researchers to find out who he was and to, let's say, trace back his biography to find out his background. And I may need a tour about him because it's an absolutely incredible story. This man, from a Jewish boy, a son of a pharmacist, managed to escape to Great Britain and became a British agent. He was there, and exactly thanks to him, Russian-Japanese war started and Port Arthur was attacked. He was there when a lot of operations were ambushed, uh, and he was also there when some important anti Bolsheviks within Europe perished, disappeared. And then he himself was given a task by the members of the um, trust operation. He was given a task to again penetrate the country under obviously the fake document, under the fake identity. And he spent weeks in Moscow not knowing that everything had been set up from the point of entry at the border till everything that had happened to him. There was women involved because he was a ladies' man. He used his charm as one of the most powerful tools, and just women also. And yes, he was also involved with the White Army movement. And yes, he assisted even the Anton Denikin White Russian movement. And yes, he was the one who helped the British uh, undermine the Russian economy shortly before the Russian-Japanese War, because he, through Odessa port, Sidney Riley managed to bring thousands of fake rubles that had been printed in Great Britain. This is known for a fact. I'm not imagining it. So the murder of Rasputin, the the fraudulent uh, Russian rubles, and some other operations were indeed uh, were indeed arranged by the British secret services to undermine the growing economy of the Russian Empire shortly before the revolution. And then when the First World War started, they didn't want Russia to withdraw from the war because this would have definitely will put the British army under great risk on the Eastern Front. I'm talking First World War here. So, what happened in Moscow? He was killed, and his body was. They got rid of the body, and that was it. So Sidney Riley just disappeared in 1925 in Moscow, one of the greatest spies of the 20th century. That was it. It was all orchestrated from the from the from Berlin to the final shot. Obviously, it would become known a little bit later and to limited number of people, but with time, this information would be available. And then there was we know who was exactly in charge of the operation to get rid of Sidney Reilly. That was the Finnish officer who was a member of the OGPU or the KGB. That's him. He was there who pulled the trigger. He was the one who delivered him to the other KGB officers. And that's just the two stories. But there were a lot more people who were allured to the Soviet Union in such a very intricate way. And but it was one story of murders and suicides and other things just to punish those who who had been trying to undermine the Bolshevik regime, or they thought he would be trying, or they thought that those people had been trying to do that. Another story is of Vasily Shulgin. That's a different story, a very different one, because the other goal of the Trest operation was to make people in Europe think that Russia was doing okay, that the Bolshevik army was not exterminating people, that life in the country was going okay, people had well, people had products, people had a good life, the country was developing, the country was not an outcast, and things like that. So Shulgin was really uh, the best candidate, the best to do the work. So who was Shulgin? Actually, he was the member of Duma during the times of Nicholas II. You know, Nicholas originally, after the Bloody Sunday, which happened in 1905, originally had to come forward and he, well, kind of initiated the creation of the Duma to restrict the powers of a monarch. And there were other things, also other concessions he made. And so Shulgin was one of the members of the Duma. He was also the one who um, prepared the documents for the abdication of Nicholas II 10 years later in 1917. And Shulgin is a unique character because he escaped after the revolution, even though he welcomed the revolution and he was there to, when Nicholas signed the abdication, but he did not expect the Bolsheviks to come to power. He was fighting for some sort of a constitutional monarchy or something similar, but not what would happen under the Bolsheviks. So Shulgin first went to Gallipoli, to Turkey, just like many Russian immigrants from the south of Russia to Gallipoli, then to Europe, to Berlin. He also lived some time in Prague. Uh, he obviously kept in touch with the White Army officers, uh, with the Bokovs, with Milukov, and many, many others. That's, by the way, Shungin, that's Kerensky. So he was there when the life of the country was changing. He was not exactly a monarchist. No, he was well, that's by the way, him around the time Nicholas would be signing the abdication. He was there. He was with Nicholas II when he signed the abdication for himself and also for his son, for Tsarevich Alexei. That's the much later illustration. That's Nicholas II on his train, and that's the portrait of Darina and everything. So he was among those very few people who witnessed history. That's the colorized photo of Shulgin. And he stayed in Europe, Berlin, Serbia, Belgrade. He 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 continued this, his work as a politician. As a He wrote for different newspapers that were released by Russian immigrants. So he also stayed in the Karlovci uh, in um, in Serbia. That's exactly where, for example, the head of of the White Army movement, General Wrangel, stayed. And so Shurgin was respected. Shurgin was always of like moderate views. He was not, um, but he was definitely against the Bolsheviks. He did not support the Bolshevik regime. And he was approached by this Operation Trust members, and he was chosen. He wasn't to be killed. They wanted him to travel, to just, again, secretly, undercover, come to the country, travel a little bit, see around, get some information, and come back. And he traveled across the country, Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, some other cities, and he even wrote a book. And everywhere he went, it's like they built parallel reality for him. All the people he met on his way, from Berlin to, again, back to Berlin, it was all a setup. He was followed every step of the way. Everyone he talked to, everywhere he would go, it was all a setup. It was all orchestrated. And the idea would be for him, a very respected member of the anti-Bolshevik society, he he was supposed to return and tell them, hey guys, the Soviets are not that bad. The Bolsheviks are not that bad. There's life. There's everything. He went to cafés. He talked to a lot of intellectuals. He obviously met such people as Alexei Tolstoy. I talk about him on the previous tour. He spoke of other people who returned, and he liked it. And he released the book. And then uh, later, when his book was just about to be released, he found out that the whole thing had been orchestrated. It was all a big, big fraud. He withdrew from politics. He moved to Yugoslavia, and he stayed there until the Nazis invaded Yugoslavia. Under Nazis, uh, he decided to stay in Yugoslavia, and under the Nazis, he stayed in Yugoslavia. He just never really showed any interest whatsoever. He just preferred to lay low. And when the Soviet army uh, invaded Yugoslavia or liberated Yugoslavia, that's another word to use for it, uh, he was arrested. And that's what happened to many after the Second World War, in the end of the Second World War, when the Soviet army liberated uh, the Europe, well, some European countries, the Russian immigrants, uh, many were punished and were brought back, arrested, labeled as spies. Uh, and the same happened to Shulgin. He was arrested and he spent about 10 years in prison. He was born in 1878. He was an old man. Um, and they couldn't care less. So he spent 10 years in prison. And then in he was supposed to spend more, but in 1953, uh, so there was an amnesty. So he was amnestied and released. And he stayed in the town of Vladimir, where the famous Vladimir Central Prison was located, still located actually. And he stayed there. He became, uh, well, everyone knew who he was. He was given an apartment, a small one-bedroom apartment in the town of Vladimir, and he became quite a respected member of the society. He was a journalist. He wrote some books. He always was good with books and he was good with words. And then he was approached by a Soviet film director who, well, just came across some information about a certain Shulgin still uh, living in the country, still in his mind and in a sound mind. And he thought to, make a film about Shulgin, taking him to different places, walking him, along well, let's say along the memory lane, remembering and on the abdication, the life during the Tsarist regime. Obviously, the idea was to show that life in the country got much better ever since the Tsarist regime under the Bolsheviks. That was the idea. And the idea was to show him as the person, well, those former monarchists and then anti-Bolsheviks who had to recognize that he had failed. So, according to the original idea of the film, uh, to show that the anti-Bolsheviks white movement failed. That was the idea. The film was released and it was even shown in the movies 3 days. That's him. So the film it was him playing himself taken to Leningrad. They even dressed him the same way he would dress before the revolution. He was taken to the former Duma building. He was taken everywhere. He was taken to the Winter Palace everywhere. He was taken to Darskoye Selo. He was taken to the place where the abdication had been signed. At that time, the car tray was even there. And he would be remembering. All the other people that he would see would be actors. He played himself. That's the absolutely amazing thing. The film is called the Before the Judgment of History, something like that. Maybe there is a better name. I'm just translating it, but let me see. Uh, so it was released in 1965. Oh, so it is called The Verdict of History. So that you can find it on YouTube, and I will be sharing some fragments. By the way, that's him. So the story goes that is coming from Europe to the Soviet Union, and he is met by a historian, a Soviet historian, that takes him to all those places to just trace back everything from the beginning, from the Tsarist Russia. That's him and a Soviet historian. This is a Soviet actor, by the way. I just don't remember his name. So this is, for example, the Taurida Palace. That was the building to that's where the Duma resided. I took you, by the way, to that area on one of my Russian Revolution tours. That's the St. Isaac's Cathedral. As you can see, as you can recognize, that's Peter the Great, the bronze horseman monument. And so they just he asks, okay, and what is in the building where the Senate used to be? Oh, that's a library. And what is in this building? And then the historian says, oh, that's some Soviet institutions. Here they are drinking coffee somewhere on the embankment of the Dnieper River. And obviously, there is a very big episode of him remembering the abdication and explaining the abdication. And again, it was supposed to be so they wanted to show the failure. But look, this man doesn't look like a failure after everything. After about 10 years in prison, it doesn't look like he read anything at all. And that's him. It's in Russian, but I have the subtitles. He is now talking about the abdication, how Nicholas II was signing the abdication, and just his thoughts about it.
Этот несчастный государь был рожден на ступенях трона, но не для трона. И это он прекрасно сознавал. У Николая Александровича было много добродетелей и достоинств семейных и общечеловеческих, но не было качеств, необходимых для царя, властности и твердости. Я не
I will be explaining for those for whom it's difficult to follow the subtitles. I specifically didn't want to create any, AI voiceover because I wanted you also to hear him speak. Nobody in the Soviet Russia spoke this way. He spoke as the man from the imperial time, and he spoke about Nicholas II. So he said this man was not meant to be a monarch. He was born royal, but he wasn't meant to be a monarch, and he was very well aware of that, as if he was, protecting Nicholas II. It didn't look like he was blaming him or condemning him for something.
хотел крови, я хотел мирным отречением вывести мою родину из тупика. Но это мне не удалось. Царь, кротко отрекшийся от престола для того, чтобы облегчить пути России, трагически погиб. И вот что тяготит мою душу. И я чувствую и до сих пор не то, что сознание вины, не то, что угрызение совести, а некую великую грусть.
For 3 days, the film was run in the cinemas, and then the Bolsheviks realized they had failed to show their repentance, to show the guilt and the failure of Shulgin and the Tsar, right? So because he didn't look like he was the defeated one, he didn't look like he had been uh, tormented by the feeling of guilt and the failure. So that's just an incredible story, obviously. So he knew that all that Operation Trust was all a big fake at that time. Yeah, he knew that, and obviously he had regretted having stayed in Yugoslavia, but he had been through it all, and not for a second would he ever abandon his beliefs. That's just he stood up for what he believed in till the very end of his life. And after all those years, and after the 10 years in prison, you saw the posture. You could see how he walked with a stick, how he spoke, how he would sit in the chair. Incredible. So that's the I guess that was a big failure. But by that time, the trust operation had no longer been functioning even. But so that's also the product of that secret operation. And so the few things of what was happening in Germany. So this Weimar Republic, after a few years of economic crisis, eventually, so the German economy started, to kind of come back to senses, and that's when Berlin, for a very short period of time, up until the great economic crisis in the States, um, uh, so that period was called Golden Atlantiker, the Golden 20s, and it was the time when, well, the businesses would be, well, okay, not well, okay, blossoming, nightlife, cafes, alcohol, drugs, mm, sex, everything was there. The Russian immigrants also enjoyed it very much. And that was the time when some people thought that was the end of the troubles. There were a lot more job opportunities, obviously, and there was also freedom, for the creative class. There were a lot of things they could accomplish, but then when another economic crisis hit Germany, obviously everything was put to an end, just within, let's say, well, almost within one night, and that was it. And when So after that, so that's 1929. That's what happened, and then again, uh, very difficult years and an incredibly high inflation rate, unemployment, poverty, hunger, and then well, yeah, that's when the Hitler came to power, and many Russians left, uh, but not all of them. Some Jews started to leave when they felt that things were going south, but not everyone left, as you know. And yes, all the support for the Russian immigrants had been withdrawn. Some people, such as Nikolai Paramonov, who was one of the, well, I mentioned him I think on the previous tour, that he originally he was a son of a Russian merchant, a very rich merchant who had lost everything after the revolution because all his factories, plants, and real estate had been nationalized by the Bolsheviks. So Paramonov came to Berlin with very little money, but then he invested in the purchase of some property and some land to build car services and different the, well, everything that was around the car industry, because um, it was just coming in its own. And he was there. He started to earn millions. He became filthy rich again. And then again, within like one night, he almost lost it all. And with the little money that he had, he, together with his family, managed to escape uh, to the side of under the American control, and that's how he saved at least some money. But then he would have to start from scratch, and then so that's how at least some Russians managed to escape. And then it would be many would go to Paris. After Berlin, little by little, people would start looking for other ways, for other places to stay because they didn't want to stay under Hitler's uh, watchful eye, and they would go to Paris. Next episode is going to be about Prague, and I will be again starting from the early 1920s, and I will be talking about the period, the same period, that's something that was happening parallel to the events that happened in Berlin. Let's have a Q&A. I'm not even overrunning. That's incredible. Let me know if you have any questions. I highly recommend to watch The Verdict of History. It's an incredibly interesting movie, and it's like a walking museum exhibit. He is the witness of all those events in a completely Soviet setting. It's the whole thing is so surreal. I only learned about this film when I was in my like late 20s. This film was prohibited. This film was all kept a big, big secret. The one who had the film for 3 days, did he ever get married or have children? The one who had the film for 3 days. It was shown in cinemas, so I don't know if anything happened to those people who watched it. I guess nothing happened. Those who allowed this film to, well, I don't know actually what happened to the film director. He was he died quite shortly after the film was released, but at least I don't know the cause of death. I think it was natural cause. He was just, I would say, very weak health. Please say the name of this movie again. The Verdict of History. The Verdict of History. Yes, sure, no problem. So the film director, I don't know the film director, the name of the spy, of course, Sidney Reilly. I hope I spell it right. Just give me a sec. And yes, he was the British. He I don't know if he had British citizenship, but he worked for the MI6, I guess. What was it at that time? I guess MI6. I might be wrong. Anyway, there you go, Sydney Rayleigh. But actually, he was Sigmund Rosenblum Rayleigh. Yeah, Sydney Rayleigh. Yeah. That's an interesting story. So how he got that name, what happened to him, and did he have a wife and children? It I can't. It's just I can't start talking about it now. His whole life is incredible collection of women, and in the core of this was this unrequited love, and yeah. No, he didn't have children, but he had a lot of women. Yeah, and he had killed quite a number of people. And yes, and also actually the whole Port Arthur operation in the Russian-Japanese War, it all happened thanks to him. So the Russian-Japanese War started thanks to, well, not because of him, but the way how it ended and how it undermined eventually the entire country, and then it contributed to the revolution as well. That's just this person. I should do a tour about him, right? The main Andrea, good to see you, by the way. Sorry, I didn't see you join. Fascinated. The man in the verdict of history had a great deal of courage. He did, but I guess he was approached. It wasn't his idea. He was approached by the film director. Goodness, what's his name? I should have provided his name. Let me see. So who was it? Um, Friedrich Ermler. That's the name of the film director. Oh, by the way, he was Wolf Moiseyevich Breslov, so he was a Jew. How interesting. He was from the Vitebsk governorate, by the way. Friedrich Ermler. But he was a very, very Soviet film director. He was given 4 Stalin awards. Goodness. Wow. So he was a very, very pro-Soviet uh, film director. I've heard of him, but I can't even name a film that he made, but definitely he was a, his film even got Grand Prix in the Cannes in 1946. I should have known this film director. Oh my goodness. The man that film was about, the man the film was about, did he have a family? Shulgin? No, no. He he didn't have a family in Yugoslavia. At least we don't know of anyone. And when he was brought to the Soviet Union after the prison, no, he lived alone. Yes. Friedrich Ermler. I let me let me share the link for the Wikipedia on film. There you go, Friedrich Ermler. So next episode is going to be about Prague, 1920s, and then Paris, and then Helsinki, and then Tbilisi too. By the way, there are still places I haven't really taken you to that are very much related to the Russian immigration. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Thank you for your interest in these tours. I know this has been quite, I would say, jaw-dropping. Some of these facts here. I mean, when I found out about this, well, some time ago, I didn't know all of this. That was it was an eye opener, honestly. And that's the whole trust thing. There are books on this Operation Trust. They were geniuses of conspiracies. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. Also, thank you for your support. And hi, Ronaldin. Sorry, I didn't see you join earlier. And thank you so much for the screenshots. I will see you in 25 minutes from now on a tour about Sergei Diaghilev and the male dancer. And tomorrow, three tours. Tamara Karstavina, a ballerina of Diaghilev Ballet seasons. And Misha's going to be talking about the Soviet fashion and beauty industry as opposed to the same in the States and Europe. It's interesting to see the contrast. And obviously, your input is welcome. You can share some memories and everything. We enjoy that very much, as you know. And I'm taking you to Jerusalem tomorrow to talk about the archaeology around the Temple Mount. And then in a week from now, so the following weekend, some tours are already there. And with regards to Jerusalem, we will be talking about the archaeology of the Western Wall and what's underground. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for your tips, Dorley. Thank you so much for the tips. I see the tips coming. Patricia is saying, from a personal perspective, you have gorgeous hair and complexion. Thank you so much, Thank you, Patricia. I thought it was something related to the tour. It's very sweet of you. Thank you, dear. So, thanks everyone. I will see you very soon on Sergei Diaghilev. Thank you, Patricia. It's very sweet of you. Bye bye.